Thank you so much for joining the League of Women Voters of Seattle-King County for carving paths to success after high school. My name is Alyssa Weed, and I'm the president of the Seattle-King County League of Women Voters. And it is my honor to welcome our awesome panelists of educators, advocates, and elected officials tonight. Tonight's program will be recorded and the link will be made available afterwards. We're also streaming live on Facebook. So if your Zoom connection gets wonky, you can also catch us there on Facebook. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the land on which we stand today as the traditional home of the Coast Salish, Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish people. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering or this dialogue. And I ask that we take the opportunity to thank them as the original caretakers of this land. And now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for the evening, Joanna Cullen, the chair of the League's Education Committee.
And good evening. And it's a pleasure to welcome you tonight for an evening of conversation. And as this evening progresses, you will notice that we are encouraging the panelists to talk to each other, which will then be followed by questions from the audience. And we ask you to write your questions and comments in chat during the program, where they will be moderated and presented to the panelists later. Questions and comments can be directed to specific panelists or to all. Welcome our panelists. Director of the City of Seattle's Department of Education and Early Learning, Dwane Chappelle. Director of Postsecondary at Puget Sound Educational Service District, Kyla, Lackie. President of Seattle Central College, Dr. Sheila Edwards Lange. King County Council Vice Chair, Joe McDermott. And Hani Makani is here she's here to support, and she's from the I'll just say it. She's an implementation manager for Puget Sound Taxpayer Accountability at King County. And she's mainly on hand to support Director Lackie. So thank you all for thank you. Councilman McDermott, let us know why the programs are important and why you were a sponsor for the legislation to create the King County Promise. You have 2 minutes.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to be able to join you for the conversation. And if you're active in education circles, you may be surprised to have a county council member talking about education, education funding, and K-12 and higher ed investments. And that would be a reasonable surprise to have. The idea that the county is involved at all in educational funding is a unique outcome of legislation the legislature adopted in 2015 as part of authorizing Sound Transit to have new revenue sources that essentially created the ability for Sound Transit to put ST3 on the November 2016 ballot. No. It was the brainchild of Jessalyn Farrell, then in the State House, and it has the equivalent of how much Sound Transit would have paid in sales tax on construction as part of the ST3 package into a fund at the state that then is passed through the state to King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties, the 3 counties, parts of which each make up the Sound Transit District. And then those 3 county councils are then in charge of making allocations for educational resources in their jurisdictions, in theory, that are part of the Sound Transit service area within their jurisdictions. So it was a unique situation for the county council to be in a position to make decisions about education investments. And so, to that end, we engaged in a deliberative process, held over a dozen community meetings, commissioned 4 reports, and hosted 21 community meetings in multiple languages with over 650 participants. It was important to us from the beginning, and in what we heard from the public, to not peanut butter our resources, to spread them so thin over every possible investment, but rather to make some targeted, deeper investments. Between now and 2034, it's expected to bring over $380 million to King County as a result of it. And to that end, we focused on some key areas. And in the post-secondary area, we wanted to improve connections between high school and post-secondary certifications and degrees, including, it was important to us, trade and apprenticeships. And our investment, we also enhance student supports, college advising and navigation, supporting students to get into post-secondary, recognizing even the application process, the application fees could be new territory and in fact a challenge for some students, just particularly first generation college students, to make sure that they have the support to be successful in that transition and then in their stay in post-secondary in 13th plus year. And with there, I'll wrap up my opening comments. Look forward to conversation throughout the evening with you.
Thank you. And I realized that I think in my opening remarks, I forgot to welcome Executive Director of the Washington Student Achievement Council, Michael Miyadi. Thank you. So, Director Chappelle, what have been the challenges and successes of pioneering the City of Seattle Promise program? What is the future vision? And you have 10 minutes.
Thank you for that question. And what I'm going to do is share my screen for everyone to see as I engage in that. Can you see my screen?
Yes, your screen is showing up perfectly.
Okay, so so thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be here. And as you mentioned earlier, I am going to give you just a brief overview of the Seattle Promise, what I call one-on-one. Please let me know if you can still see this. I'm just making sure you can see a picture of myself and Dr. Lange, correct?
Yes, and so what I'll say is I'll let you know if we can't see it.
Okay, thank you for that. And so here's just a brief little overview of just the topics of what I'll go through briefly is just a quick one-on-one as you asked. And now, so here's a brief timeline of the Seattle Promise. And I love to show this and start here because as you see, if you look at the bottom, as of today, where the Seattle Promise is fully implemented in 17 high schools in Seattle Public Schools. Super excited about that over the 3 campuses. I will start with the first, as you see, that you'll see the first portion says, we started with the 13th year program, and it started back in 2008 at South Seattle College. Mayor Durkin came in 2017, and she had extremely passion for making sure that this amazing program that was already offered to scholars at Seattle, South Seattle College was expanded to all students, and wanted to make sure that not only all students had the opportunity, but really was passionate about trying to figure out how do we expand it from the 3 schools that it was at in 2017 to each and every high school in Seattle Public Schools. So the process was we created a design team, and the design team consisted of like our amazing partners, Dr. Lange and her team, other college advisors. We had our other great partners from Seattle Public Schools who was at the table with us and deal, and we had community folks as well. And we really just wanted to make sure that what we was creating was going to be what's best for our young scholars. And so from there, we took the lessons that was learned from the design team and we embedded it within the FEP levy that was passed in 2018. And from there, we expanded from the three schools that I was at, three high schools that I was at, Chief Sealth, Cleveland High School, and Rainier Beach High School, to 6 schools the first year. So we went from the 6 schools to the first year in 2018, and then we expanded from those high schools to all 3 of the college campuses as well. So as you'll see in step 5 right here, you'll see that we partnered with our colleges. We had a partnership agreement with the colleges, and we work with our partners at Seattle Public Schools. And now what you see is we have 17 high schools, as I started with, campuses where each and every student have an opportunity to participate in the Seattle Promise once they graduate. A little bit about the program. What you'll see is that the program, it has 2 years of up to 90 credits tuition for our scholars. And ultimately what we want to make sure when each and every student step into the Seattle Promise program that they leave and obtain a degree or certificate or some credential to make sure that they're going to be prepared for post-secondary, and that's anything that they decide to do. So there's 3 years of tuition up to 90 credits. There are a couple of type of supports for students. There's college prep support that happens in the high schools. And then once they step into the colleges with our partners, there's college persistence and completion support to help make sure that our scholars have the necessary tools they need to move forward. The next piece is, and just making sure you guys can see the slides advancing, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a little bit of how the scholarship works right here. So,
Oh, this one I didn't see advance.
okay, are you on the slide that says how the scholarship works?
It says Seattle Promise timeline.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me just click down. Maybe I'm in the wrong. Can you see now?
I think you need to go one more down, I think.
You're in the
There.
mixed set yet,
Yeah, there it
rather
is.
than the separated ones.
Okay, but you
No,
can see
that's
it.
okay.
You can see now how the scholarship works.
Yes.
Okay, and so this is how the scholarship works. Thank you for bearing with me with this. So ultimately, you have federal and state financial aid, and all when the students step in, this is the first piece right here, and then there's other once students. Once their federal and state aid is leveraged, if students have other type of tuition or a scholarship or other type of funding, that's the second piece.
Somehow you've become muted, Dwane, or Director Chappelle there.
That's no problem. It said the host muted me. I think I was talking too much.
No.
The next piece is the third remaining portion of how the scholarship works is the promise tuition. That's the piece that us with the colleges are kicking in to make sure our scholarships are supported. And then there's a piece that when we were designing this package that we really want to be intentional about, and that's the equity scholarship. An equity scholarship are for those scholars who have any type of economic need. And this scholarship could be for funding books, supplies, transportation, and so forth. And then you have the total package right there where all funds are available to a student. So I just want to really talk about how this scholarship opportunity works. And then I want to get to the part where you asked earlier about our partnerships, the successes and challenges. And I've always want to start with the successes. You know, the successes, as you see, we really have a common goal, a clear North Star. It's an amazing partnership between 3 institutions, Seattle schools, our colleges in the city of Seattle. We've prioritized our relationship and understand what our priorities are for our scholars. Students have really become interested in the program. And this has really been something that we've been excited about. Of course, our mayor's commitment to the program from the infancy stage has grown. And then the last piece of success, and these are just a couple we just tried to pull out for you, there's so many, was more about the communications and branding that our outreach efforts are for. So, and the challenges, what I wanted to share really is just implementing a new program. When you implement a new program, it comes with a lot of visibility, and you know, sometimes things come up that we didn't think about. There's a challenge of just pivoting our resources to make sure that we're meeting our needs during COVID. As we design this program collaboratively, none of us thought about we would be in this pandemic right now. So that's been a challenge. It's like, how do we pivot the resources that we have to make sure that our scholars are going to be supported? And then the last piece has been just alignment on our data practices and working together through this continuous cycle of improvement. We know as we're getting through it, we see areas that we really want to dig deep in, and just thinking about the model, how it's built, and the available resources for us to get through these cycle of improvement together. So I'll pause here. And this is the conclusion of what I wanted to share about the successes and challenges and about the overview of the program. And I look forward to later on discussion.
Okay, thank you. Director Lackie, since your organization has been chosen as a King County Promise System supporting organization, let us know the vision for your work and the challenges for implementation.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. And I'm joined here tonight with my colleague, Mercy Deremolas, also in the crowd, and Hannah with King County. Appreciate your support always. So I'm going to share a bit about the work that we've been building through King County Promise. And this has happened over the last several years. We've been working with hundreds of partners over the county to really build out what is needed in our region. And so just a little bit about our organization. So the Puget Sound College and Career Network is at the Puget Sound Educational Service District. So we support all of Pierce and King County. And our work is really focused on building regional capacity to increase post-secondary readiness and success. And we do that by building up capacity through professional learning and coaching, creating things that are innovative with our partner organizations, and really working towards systems alignment and deeper coordination, and all to try to remove barriers, especially for students of color and those who are first generation to college, and students who are low income, so that they have the opportunity to access and obtain post-secondary credentials. So I'm going to share a bit about some of the current challenges of post-secondary access and success. And this is really what the King County Promise was designed around, really getting rooted in the current barriers. So we see the system is really, the support that students receive it happens by chance, but it's not a guarantee. And the current accountability for the K-12 system ends at graduation. And then there's no one that really is responsible for that transition, for students actually transitioning from system to system. And so we see a lot of different things happening, but overall a lot of things that just are haphazard or things that are by chance for students. And at the same time, we also know that 95% of our local students, this is a very recent survey just redone, and we get the same results. 95% of students want to go on to post-secondary. They know it's critical for their future, and it's really part of their vision for themselves. And yet we still see consistently that about 30% of students actually earn a college credential. So some of the major issues that we see are that there's just not enough supports generally, but it's also unequal in terms of the support that's out there. So this is a comparison of two districts, and you'll see the very stark differences between the numbers of low-income students and yet the same number of college and career staff at those schools. And we know that students who are coming from low-income backgrounds are relying on school staff even more than upper income students, and that a lower caseload is really needed to make sure that we're providing more supportive interactions for students and not just transactional or opt-in support. And then at our local colleges, we're also seeing that the ratios for advisor supports are 2 or 3 times what the recommended levels are. So just overall, our system, especially the support system, is really underfunded across the board. And then for young people who didn't graduate from high school, there's really a gap in the on-ramps to actually get into college. So right now, before COVID, the estimates were about 20,000 young people were in King County and considered opportunity youth, or young people who did not graduate and are not in living wage jobs. And because of COVID, we're anticipating that this number will at least double. So this is a big challenge for our region. And this is at the national level. It's a bit hard to read, it's probably small, but I'll just give you the headlines here. This is the changes for students actually enrolling in college after high school. And this is from fall of 2019 to fall of 2020. And students that are coming from low income schools, from high poverty schools, are really, and for high minority schools, there's the greatest difference, the shift in enrollment. And then also nationally, seeing that those big changes, a lot of that is happening both at the private nonprofit 4-year colleges and also especially at our community colleges. And then this is straight off the Washington Student Achievement Council's website, tracks all of the financial aid completion. And we're seeing locally, this is an early indicator of post-secondary enrollment, is the financial aid completion for this year's seniors. It's a great indicator for us to see where students are headed and how their plans are coming together. And we're seeing across the board a drop in the number of students that are completing financial aid. So anything that's red or dark red is a 5 to 10% drop, and the green is that they're either even or a little bit above last year. So there are some opportunities, and we do see some bright spots. Again, this is from a recent student survey that 95% of students want to go on to post-secondary. This is consistent year after year, and 93% of students expect to go on to post-secondary. So this is really something that students believe is possible and is part of their expectations for themselves. This is about where have students actually learned, who do they rely on to learn about college, who's most helpful. And especially for students of color that are first generation, school staff is the primary source of where they're finding information and getting that support. And there was a recent study that just came out showing some really incredible results locally, where local opportunity youth were paired with a navigator to support them through their transition, and just saw incredible results where those who participated were 3 times more likely to enroll in education, and especially for young men of color, they were 7 times more likely to enroll. And so I think there are some really positive opportunities here, and I think especially we definitely are looking at the big impact of Seattle Promise and the work that's been built out of the 13th year, and seeing some really big uptake this year for Seattle Promise. I think that's another big opportunity for us locally. So I'll tell you just a little bit about King County Promise, and this is what has really been built through many different visions and voices around the county coming together to really co-design a model that's about a more comprehensive vision for more equitable, more accessible, and more supported post-secondary access and success in our region. So the overall vision is that all young youth of color and others who have been historically underserved really get that high quality support all the way through to their post-secondary credential, and that we make some really big systems change and build the capacity that's needed to do this work at scale. And in the long term, really wanting to build an evidence base and to be able to demonstrate to the state the level of staffing that's needed, the level of programming to really get us to our post-secondary enrollment and success rates and really invest in Washington students. So we hope to get to a place where it's much more equitable, much more targeted, there's coordination, it's really student-centered, and there's more accountability. And we think that with this, we will get closer to our state and local goals of at least 70% of students earning a post-secondary credential and closing opportunity gaps. So about just headlines on what is King County Promise. There's two big buckets of the work. So both the advising support, really enhancing the support that students receive at the high schools, the colleges, and the community organizations, providing an equity stipend for students who are in the lowest incomes, really building out the curriculum and the materials, and then working to ensure that the transitions are much more seamless. And with that, we're hoping to really leverage a lot of the existing resources in our system, some of the funding streams, and also the Washington College Grant to ensure that more students and who are eligible are applying for Washington College Grant. And then at the systems level, there's a lot that we're working towards around data sharing, the placement practices that happen when students actually enroll in college, and the overall trying to amplify some effective practices that are happening locally to share those across the entire region. And with at full scale, we envision that the model will support so many young people across our region and really focused on youth of color and youth who are lower income, who identify as LGBTQ+, experience homelessness and foster care, or have a disability, and otherwise have been underserved by our current system. So we're really excited about the power of really investing in young people. We think there's some big things that can happen just in the short term in terms of increasing access to financial aid and tightening up some of these systems and policy changes. And then over the long term, really changing what the system looks like in our local region. This is the quick snapshot. So also a shout out to the 13th year model and our long haul work that's happened in this region to build out a promise model locally. We've been convening systems leaders for the last 13 years through the Puget Sound Coalition for College and Career Readiness, and really looking to our partners at Seattle colleges to learn from all of the work that's been built with Seattle Promise to get us to the point that we're at now. So we're excited to continue to build some of this foundational capacity right now. And in the later this year is when the first phase of the Promise partnerships, the RFP would open. And then that programming would actually start in school year 2022. We'll continue to work really closely with those partnerships that were selected, and then also supporting others who are interested in becoming partnerships in the future to be ready. And then a second RFP would open in 2023, and we'll continue to evaluate and adjust the program and adapt the model over the next several years. This is the short, non-comprehensive list of many of the organizations who've contributed. It's really been hundreds of educators and students and community members who have helped make this vision come to life. So it's a really powerful space to be able to work in. And I think there are a few things that if folks are interested in getting involved, we are definitely kicking off some fundraising efforts to build out the support that we have throughout the model. There's a potential that at some point PASTA funds, the funding stream would need protection where it looks okay for now, but we can let you know if that's not the case in the future. And then I think we're also looking for other funding streams in the future that could support this work because tuition alone won't get our students all the way across the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Edwards Lange, as president of Seattle Central College, please comment on the experience with the promised programs for the college and the students. And comment on the previous presentations. How are the programs successfully fulfilling a need? And what are the challenges? And you have 10 minutes.
Great, thank you. Kyla, if you can stop sharing screen, then I can start. Thank you for that. I just want to emphasize something that Kyla just mentioned, and that is that tuition alone is not enough. And so one of the things that in the design of the Seattle Promise, we included wraparound services and to address the caseload issue that she mentioned in her earlier presentation. So in the Seattle Promise program, the caseload for advising is 100 to 1. So it really does address many of the issues that come up nationally. So let me see here. I want to acknowledge and, okay, so now, of course, technology never does what you want it to do. There it is. Acknowledge and thank the folks from the Seattle Promise team, Melanie McMillan and Barb Childs, who I know are on the call as well. And they will correct me and help me answer questions later on as we go through this. So the first thing is that, as you heard, the program started at South Seattle, but Mayor Durkin had the vision to move it to all high schools in the Seattle Public Schools. And as we have moved along with the program, one of the things that we feel like we are empowering young people. And so they will go to college if they have the opportunity, but they will also give us feedback. And so we're working with our partners in Seattle Public Schools and the city of Seattle to make sure that we are addressing things as they come up. So we're trying to be flexible. At the same time, we know that this is a highly visible program and that we have a lot of accountability to the taxpayers who have paid or who are paying for this, and hoping that we'll have different outcomes for Seattle students. Thus far, we are exceeding our expectations. So more than 60% of the students are students of color. 35% are the first in their families to go to college. And we are, even though it's not means tested, we are reaching many of the families who are below the area median income in our area. So 2/3 of the families are making less than $75,000. I think the most exciting part for me, at least as an educator, is that the outcomes for these early cohorts, and remember, we just went to all 17 high schools last year, we are already exceeding what we thought would happen. So our retention rates, and that's how we measure student persistence towards a credential, those retention rates outperform retention rates for other students. For example, for our regular students, our fall to winter, our fall to fall retention rate is 58%, but for Promise students, it's 71%. And so we are pretty excited about that. The other thing is that we have students who have already graduated, so in 2 years or less. So we're looking at the national average and saying, you know, our students, we generally measure retention completion rates in 4-year terms. So we're not at a 4-year period yet, but the early returns looking at 2-year retention rates are promising that we're already exceeding the national average. Some of the implementation successes and challenges. It's funny, I always say one of the greatest successes is also one of the greatest challenges, and that is the interest from students and families in Seattle. So we had projected that we would be about 800 students and about 1,700 applications, about 800 students enrolling when we were fully implemented in year 7. We are in year 2, and we have already exceeded that. This year's graduating seniors, we had 2,100 students apply, and that's half of the graduating class in Seattle Public Schools. We are enrolled at over 850 students. So that is higher than what we expected once we would be in year 7. So trying to get up to speed and hiring people to make sure that we could meet that caseload of 100 to 1 what has been a challenge. The data management and sharing, particularly around transcripts and the workload that it was creating for the high schools, was a problem, but I think we've worked that out. We recently signed a data sharing agreement with Seattle Public Schools that is making that easier for us. We are trying to be responsive to student needs during COVID-19. So we have had to pivot to remote operations, and I'm trying to stay in touch with students and making sure that we're delivering all of the program remotely, student services remotely. We've actually been able to do that and keep it going throughout COVID and reach these higher numbers of students enrolling. And it has strengthened the partnership with the Seattle School District. We've always had partnerships with Seattle school districts, but this 3-way partnership with the Seattle Public Schools and the city has really strengthened as a result of our work together. So part of what we do is we're listening to students, and this has been particularly important as we are as we're on remote operations. And so we have tried to, when we hear things from students, work in partnership with the city and with Seattle Public Schools to respond to those. For example, because of COVID, students have wanted to delay enrollment or go part-time. And so we have been working with the city and with Seattle Public Schools to make that possible. We've also tried to do more, and part of this is our guided pathways work in terms of making sure that we're doing more programming to help students understand the connection between their academic program and what they want to do later. And as we are doing this, as I said, the city and the Seattle Public Schools have been extremely helpful in terms of providing the reliable funding, but also the flexible funding. But as we move forward, this is we launched our Equity Can't Wait fundraising campaign last week, focused on students of color and increasing their completion rates in the Seattle colleges, and increasing equity scholarships and mentoring for students and funding completion scholarships for students is part of that campaign, and with the focus on Seattle Promise students especially, because we want to make sure that if students go beyond the 2 years of tuition that is provided by the city, that we can fund completion scholarships for those who need to take longer. Because as I said earlier, it does we measure our completion rates in 4-year rates because community college students take a little longer to complete because many of them are working part-time. So with that, I will answer questions later on.
Thank you. Executive Director Miyadi, can you please respond to the previous presentations this evening and let us know how the state supports the local promise programs?
Yep, thank you.
And I believe we have your slideshow.
Okay, I believe I have taken control through a share, and if it's okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You're sharing your screen. Okay,
Yes, I'm sharing the
Okay.
screen. So, yeah, so I'm Mike Miyadi. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Student Achievement Council. That's a somewhat unusual name for a state agency. We are a cabinet level state agency. I'm in the governor's cabinet. I'm an appointee of his. We also, unlike most of our sister state agencies, we do have a board of that we work with, in which we have 5 people appointed by the governor, including a student. One of our governor's appointed members is Sativa Jones, who works in college going and planning with students in the Highline School District in South King County. We also have representatives of the public 4-year universities, the public 2-year colleges, the SBCTC, the system of community technical colleges, Dr. Lange's institutions and others are a part of. A representative of private colleges and universities, as well as the state's superintendent of public instruction, Chris Reichdahl. We work on a wide variety of higher education and post-secondary issues, primarily around access and success for students for people who don't have access and for students who are not successful. I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of some of what we do and perhaps how it connects to things on the ground, and then share with you some perspectives on the Seattle Promise. Our goal, enunciated now almost 8 years ago, is to dramatically increase the educational attainment level of Washington residents. And this slide right here captures the significance of educational attainment in shaping the lifetime earnings, in other words, the financial independence of Americans. And as you can see, as you climb from left to right, the ladder of educational credentials, the average lifetime earnings goes up significantly. The challenge we have is that as you climb that ladder, the categories to the right of higher levels of education get whiter and whiter, and tend to come more and more from white students, white alumni, who grew up in homes where there was college going supports. And our focus is on those who don't have access to this and don't have the opportunity to climb that. I'm a little trouble moving on to get my, okay, there we go, page now. Okay, this very quickly, this is we have a strategic framework to try to achieve that increase in educational attainment, and it's based on 4 basic clusters of work. That higher education should be affordable. We need to have ever increasing enrollment beyond the current levels of enrollment that we have in order to get to our goal. But more students need to be successful. They need to complete the programs that they're in. And we need much more student supports, which by student supports, we're referring to the basic needs that many students these days face in terms of housing, food security, transportation, childcare, and the like. And all of this work is grounded and centered in a commitment on equity and closing the racial and ethnic gaps and disparities that exist in educational success. So we simply say, if we do, as a state, build a more affordable and supportive educational environment, more Washingtonians will enroll in programs and complete credentials. One of our biggest challenges right now is, and the state as a whole, about 60% of high school seniors go on to post-secondary of any kind. We do, this includes everything from traditional degree programs to certificate programs, the like, but only about 60% of our high school seniors go on within 1 year after graduating from high school. The national average is 70%. We're behind Oregon and California, and we're a good 10 plus points behind other states that we view ourselves as highly competitive, in the global economy. King County is higher, is currently the 70%, but normally major metropolitan areas and large cities would be ahead of a state average. So we can do better in King County, and we can do better across the whole state. I think one of the questions in the chat was about what barriers do people face. This is the result of a survey of Washington students at the state community technical colleges around issues that they face. So you see 62% report food insecurity and housing insecurity, or in fact, homeless. 32% are just food or housing, and it breaks it out separately. But this is a huge and a growing challenge, exacerbated in COVID, but long pre-existing, the pandemic and health crisis we face now. This is the last slide I'm going to show you. This shows where we are now in terms of the different racial ethnic groups in the state and their attainment rates in terms of having some form of educational credential beyond high school. So this shows the extreme disparities that we have across groups. And the council his commitment is that we are not seeking to get 70% statewide, no matter how we get it. We are seeking to lift all communities to 70%, both in terms of racial ethnic populations and communities, but also on looking at in the perspective of around the state, geographically. I will now shift briefly to a little bit of discussion of a perspective on Seattle Promise and its interconnection with the state. I was very lucky to have been involved in a similar role in another state for a number of years, and also helped lead a state public higher education system that included public universities and community colleges, and then spent a number of years around the country working with major national foundations on exactly the kind of programs that Seattle promises and other community or regional based college going efforts. We're very lucky here in Seattle and King County to have the program that the promise as it exists now, because in most of the country, these efforts are supported purely by private philanthropy. So we're very fortunate in King County to have the public sector commitment cutting across the county and the city, and of course with the state infrastructure, financial aid and the like. That's a critical ingredient, because most Americans view their post-secondary opportunities as grounded in the places where they live and go to school and where they will ultimately work. So some students do move hundreds of miles away to go to college, but the vast majority of Americans go to a college near where they lived before they were a student there. And many of them still live with their family, or they in fact are they are one of the breadwinners in a family as a young adult or an older adult going on. So it is important to understand the local context, to have people on the ground and leaders and champions who can figure out how to make this work with an understanding of that region and that place. It's extraordinary to have senior elected officials like the mayor and the county leaders, county council and the county executive, committed to this kind of work, because all of that can help build a broader community culture, committed to the work, committed to college going and success, committed to tearing down the racial and ethnic barriers that stand in the way of so many young people. And it's also, I think, something I've talked more and more with people about in the last few years is the need to understand that, to draw a parallel to the health crisis we just faced, if we had tried to deal with COVID only through the perspective of, I'm going to try to end my share. If we had tried to deal with COVID only from the perspective of the network of healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, and other frontline providers in hospitals, we would not have been as successful as we were in this state. It's because we have a strong public health network, both in terms of a state Department of Health, and we have strong county-based health agencies led by Jeff Duchin here in King County, who I worked with all of these networks around the state in dealing with these issues on college campuses. And it is this sort of broader public perspective and community leadership role that someone like Dwane Chappelle here, many mayors, I mean, I've been in many cities, worked with initiatives like this. They have not made the commitment to have somebody in the mayor's cabinet like Dwane Chappelle is to play the leadership role he's doing. They may not have a regional network like the Puget Sound College and Career Network that Kyla, helps to lead. These are critical components in addition to the political leadership, the public leadership that a mayor brings to it, and also a very strong community college, system and leadership that brings to it too. All of these are the ingredients of success. And the great challenge for us in the state is to figure out how to constantly adapt and evolve to support the work on the ground here, and to see it as us being responsive to your needs, not you being responsive to the center, to the state capitol. But also the challenge for me as I go around the state is, how do we help spark in other parts of the state the same kind of community-based, regionally led, strong, powerful, grassroots commitment to this work that you are building here in Seattle. It's a model for the rest of the state, and you do join among a number of communities around the country that are models for how this is evolving, nationally. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you. So Director Chappelle, please comment on Dr. Edwards Lange and Director Miyadi's presentations and other things that this has made you think about.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for this opportunity again, just to even comment. After just seeing the presentations and listening to the dialogue, a couple of things come to mind. One is just the importance of making sure that our scholars, when they graduate from high school, are going to be equipped and prepared, and they have some opportunity post high school. We saw some data earlier from Kyla. She talked about the 95% of the students wanting to go to post-secondary school. So I'm just proud that we are in a position for, in Seattle specifically, to make sure that that barrier is removed and our scholars have an opportunity when they graduate. The other thing I think about is what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing right now is just this us working together, collaboration and partnership, because nobody can do this alone. Dr. Lange mentioned earlier about working with the Seattle schools, working with, the city. That triangulation right there is a true partnership that makes, that creates nothing but avenues and pathways for success, right? We want to make sure that our scholars graduate, that they not only enroll, but they complete, and they have an opportunity once they graduate to either go to 4-year or some type of career. And the other thing that makes me think about is what I'm hearing, and it's just thinking about it from birth all the way through post-secondary, right? We at the city of Seattle, we have a very robust Seattle preschool program, making sure that our scholars are going to be ready for kindergarten when they step into school. Dr. Lackie just showed a visual that talked about the life wages increase, when students have access. The same thing when our scholars have access to preschool. And I just think about from the beginning, what are we doing from prenatal all the way through post-secondary? So those are some key pieces that come from me, but there's another piece that I would like to end on that's extremely important that was mentioned, with two pieces. One was equity. How are we making sure that students for some educational justice have access to these resources and they're going to be prepared to take advantage of them? And the last piece is, once our scholars are in high school or middle school, we have to make sure that we're getting them, college and career ready. If there's just, and we have at the city so many investments that are making sure that our schools that we're supporting is gonna ensure that our scholars have college and career readiness embedded within. So that's what I wanted to comment on, and I just appreciate this opportunity to even have this dialogue with you.
Thank you. So, Director Lackie, can you also comment on what you've heard this evening?
Yeah, I think it's a really beautiful collection of folks that are working at so many different levels to really change the system and change what experiences are. So I really appreciate this this panel, and I'm grateful for the chance to work with you all outside of this space too. I think part of what stood out to me, I think just hearing the Seattle Promise, the incredible uptake in the program. I think there's something really to pay attention there, because we are seeing nationally a drop in enrollment and a drop in college going. And here in Seattle, we're seeing an increase in this program. So I think there's something really interesting there, and I'd love to hear any thoughts that you all have about what that's about, and what's part of the what's shifting for students in taking up the program. And then Mike, in your slides, really the puzzle, where it's not just one piece to solve our overall post-secondary gaps, not just affordability, but it really does take more support and really centering equity. That really resonates and is very similar to the big picture that we're looking at locally. And I think just there was a question about the RFPs for the King County Promise. That'll be developed later this year. And then as soon as those are available, we'll be sure to share that out widely, all of the criteria and what the application looks like. That will be developed later this year.
I think, thank you. I think Dr. Edwards-Lange, although originally I thought of you as commenting on the other pieces, I think I'm going to give you 2 minutes to comment on what you've heard also, since you did a 10-minute.
Okay, you know, as I was reflecting on what Dwane mentioned about the college and career readiness, one of the design elements that we put into place for Seattle Promise are outreach specialists who go out and partner with the high school staff to not only get students to apply for the Seattle Promise, but to begin that career work early, you know, to begin thinking about how the Seattle Promise fits into the high school and beyond plan and what kinds of things that those students can do. Exposing them to all of the trades as well. So there was a question in the chat about, is this just for students who want to transfer? No, although the vast majority of our students have indicated an interest in transfer, they can use this program to study a trade at one of the Seattle colleges. And so we call it the technical education. So we have partnered with Seattle Public Schools and they are doing a lot more on career and technical education to provide opportunities for students to take field trips, to have, while they're still in high school, and learn more about non-traditional fields, and then what kind of credentials they need and how the Seattle Promise can be used to pursue those credentials. So there is a lot of design elements that went into thinking about how we get students on a path to college and how we get them through college and then what happens afterwards. And that post-secondary credential includes things other than our traditional AA degree.
So Councilman McDermott, can you now comment on what you believe success would, how it would look, and then also some of the strategies you feel can overcome the challenges?
Yes, thank you, Joanna. You know, in our conversation tonight, we've a number of people have used the term promise. And I want to acknowledge that we have different definitions. The Seattle program is different from the King County Promise program in its particulars, but in its overall goals of getting more students from high school to post-secondary, to some sort of post-high school education, supporting them and sustaining them in that. That's the promise we're all trying to make. And we're interrelated in how we do it. The exact methods of one program versus the other are different, but the goals are very much the same. And I don't think we should be distracted by the fact that we might be using the same terms for slightly different immediate impacts, because it very much is the same overall goal. Why do we have that goal? Well, we have an obligation to our young people. I think Dr. Edwards-Lange's fundraising program is very aptly named. Equity can't wait. The desperate levels of attainment, of educational achievement based on race and ethnicity is significant. And we have to recognize that that is tied to socioeconomic income levels and people who are first generation college students, people whose families, whose parents have not gone to college. I think I'm probably the example of who we think of as the typical person moving through the educational system. Both of my parents were teachers. There was no question that whether or not I was going to go to college. The question was, what college was I going to go to? And you may have realized what college I went to, and then I'm a little excited about a basketball game on Saturday night. But the question was where I was going to college, not if. But the statistics and stories we've heard tonight make clear that I'm not typical. That we need support for students to make that connection from high school to college. We know what it does for their success, and we need to make sure that that handoff, that transition is smooth and flawless. I think it was Director Chappelle who shared that a statistic that I don't keep in mind often enough, but strikes me every time I've heard it. For first generation college students, if they're going to apply and make that connection, make that transition, it's not a family member, it's not a parent, because their parents haven't gone to college. It's not an experience they're familiar with. It's somebody in their school. It's somebody in their school building who takes an interest and supports them in selecting a college, a program, application, getting there, maybe even making a campus visit and knowing, understanding that they want to apply and do this, and giving them the confidence that they can do it and they will be successful if they're in college. That's the promise we're talking about. The promise of success and attainment and achievement, that we can't leave students behind. Equity can't wait. That's what this promise is about. And that's why we have to take on the challenges before us and make sure that largely it's economic and funding, but it's also continuing to build those connections between K-12 and higher ed, and to make sure that once students are in higher ed, they continue to have the support to be successful in college, whether it's a community college, four-year college, apprenticeship, whatever attainment they're seeking. We need to support them in doing that. I thought Michael's slide entitled Strategic Framework, I should have screenshot it and stole it, Michael, was really good because it visualized how strong equity was at the center, and everything else about the system and education circled around it. Affordability, enrollment, I didn't get everything on the slide, but it all centered around equity and focused on equity. That's what we're doing with the Promise Scholarship. We have to expand who is successful, who has those opportunities, and do that by expanding who has access to college.
Okay, thank you.
For your interest in this work and in joining us and taking it on.
Okay, so now we're ready for the question portion. And I'm asking people, the panelists, to think about keeping their remarks as brief as possible, although I know you have a lot of information to share, but that allows us to ask a few more questions. So Meg Van Wyk is our chat moderator. So Meg, what questions do you see? What would you say is the number one question, and for whom?
Well, the number one has been partly addressed, is about the apprenticeship and trade schools. Is this going to support students to apprenticeship and trade schools? And what does the outlook look like for these students employment-wise? And I really don't, maybe Director Miyadi would be good to address that.
Yeah, I can just quickly let you know that the state financial aid programs were expanded in the last 2 years to include apprenticeship programs. And a key element to understand apprenticeship programs is South Seattle College, provides a lot of what's called the related supplemental instruction and apprenticeship programs, and is not only probably the center of gravity for that work in the state, but one of the best in the country on that. All of the technical programs, any credit-bearing program and it's funny you use trade school. My father was a graduate of trade school, and usually I find that term when we use trade school, you're maybe revealing a little something about your shall we say experience, in the world. But yeah, so the state aid program covers a wide variety of these programs, including even some of our more proprietary training schools, because we do match the federal Pell Grant system, to do that. So this state's been a leader in recognizing that we want to support all pathways, but also very importantly, do not let those pathways have glass ceilings that say once you get somewhere, you stop there. So very recently, there has been the articulation of a construction apprenticeship program pathway to go to Central Washington University to get a bachelor's degree in facilities management, construction management, right? Because what happens over the course of many people's lives is they just, for whatever reason, personal choice and many other things, at the 18 to 22, 23, 4-year, whatever, they're not necessarily looking for the formal classroom environment, or it doesn't work for them, or just whatever. But later in life, they move on, they see different opportunities, they get onto the first rung of in an industry, and they want to go up further. And we do have a world that's kind of structured to sort of, say, if you don't have your bachelor's degree by the time you're 24, we're going to make it really hard for you to get it, unfortunately. So we want to have that very different, and we want to have many roads to the bachelor's degree, not just by showing up and being the typical college freshman living in a dorm, so that you could start in an HVAC program or an automobile mechanic program or an apprenticeship, and that could be part of a pathway that you may choose to take 8 to 10 to 15 or 20 years to go down, but you could get to the baccalaureate or beyond, in terms of achieving your personal goals.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Meg, do you have another question here?
Yeah, there's another good one about, is there childcare pulled into these programs to help young parents? Maybe Director Lackie would be interested in answering that.
I think we're definitely looking to make sure that students are supported to be at to go all the way through their college experience. But I think at the individual colleges, that's where the childcare would really come into play.
And
Yes. And Michael may be able to talk more about this, but I know that he talked about the data from the Real Hope Survey, and we do have students who have children, and we've partnered with United Way on benefit hubs around our community and technical college system, so that we can provide access to students to the services out in the community. So if they're eligible for a child care voucher or eligible for and programs like the City of Seattle's, we can make those connections to those services. And so childcare is one of those.
And we do have a state childcare subsidy program. It's only part of it doesn't really solve for all the problems that families face. It has sort of been biased against college students for many years as a policy choice by the legislature. We're slowly turning that around and may take a big jump forward this session in allowing people pursuing a post-secondary credential to have the same access to that subsidy program as anyone else who is otherwise eligible.
Okay, Meg, are you saying another? Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of combine a few questions here about poor. There's one here about a low graduation rate instead of higher. And I'm going to combine that with the barrier question. And Director Miyadi had a pretty stunning graph that showed only 60% of the students are actually going on after high school, and comparing to New York and was it California and Oregon, I think, where we were much lower. That was a stunning graph to me to see. And I'm just wondering if there's academic barriers, if our students are graduating from high school and struggling with the academic needs and needing to take remediation classes, if that is also a barrier.
Well, that wouldn't be any different here probably than elsewhere in the country. I came here 4 years ago from elsewhere, and where I came from had a much higher college going rate. There are some broad historical cultural differences around regions of the country on college going. I've been asked that many, many times. I just simply think we don't know why we have such a low college going rate, despite having one of the most generous, financial aid environments in the country, some of the highest quality public institutions at both a 2-year and 4-year level to go. So that's why I do say frequently, we cannot expect educators and educational institutions to solve for this. This is a societal issue. That's why the leadership of the mayor and the King County elected leadership, and even the Gonzaga graduate over there in Councilman McDermott is just so important. And I speak that as a secret Jesuit graduate from somewhere else myself. This is a societal issue. We need to figure out how to come together across all segments of society to solve this college going challenge.
And if I can add the college going is one, but the completion is another. And so our students all students, even when I was at the University of Washington, the graduation rate, I think at that point was around 72%. I think it may be closer to 80% now, but no colleges have 100% graduation rate. So things happen in students' lives. They have crises, they have family crises. Many of our students are working. So when we think about 43% of our students are working part-time. And that's why for the Seattle Promise, we built in that we wanted students to go, we have a preference for students to go full-time, because part-time enrollment and completion of college level math and English in your first year are really good predictors of whether a student is going to complete. And that speaks to the remediation issue that you mentioned, Meg. If a student is not able to get directly placed into college level math their first year, they're going to struggle to complete. And that's why the data sharing agreement with Seattle Public Schools was so important for us to be able to place students into courses, college level courses, based on grades. So we use what we call multiple measures, multiple ways of placing students rather than just standardized tests. Because the data shows that high school grades are just, and Kyla can actually speak to this too, because the ESD has done a lot of this work on multiple measures, that grades in high school are just as good a predictor of success in college level courses as these standardized tests. So we're trying to think of different ways to make sure that our students are successful. Finances, we participated in the Gates Foundation Project Finish Line grant a few years ago. And what we found was that students were like 1/4 away from finishing, and they would get into some kind of financial crisis where they owed $200 or $300. And they would stop out because they could not afford that $200 or $300. That's why we have completion scholarships as part of our Equity Can't Wait campaign, and it's part of what we do right now. We just want to grow it.
Diane just asked, are there exit interviews done when students leave college programs to get more? That's a very good question, to get more feedback as to what worked and didn't work. And you'd probably be a good person to answer that.
Yes. And we are being really intentional about doing that with Seattle Promise students. Sometimes those students, when they leave, they don't return our phone calls or respond to our surveys. But we, with Promise students, we have a lot more information about them. So we're able to track them down easier, and we're getting information about why they're stopping out. And to, frankly, a lot of students stop out and then come back. That's why the 2-year rate, the 7-year rate is not really a good indicator for how many of our students eventually complete.
So, what else are you saying comments or anything else that people are wanting to have addressed, Meg?
No, there's a detailed question about the DEL, about their budget. If we have time, I could ask Director Dwane Chappelle about it. It also funds childcare, and the question is how much is going to the college and how much is going to the preschool.
So the question, let me just make sure to repeat, I understand how much of our budget is going to early learning and how much is going to the post-secondary piece. I don't have numbers right offhand, but I can tell you of our of our levy, I would estimate that around 54% of it is carved out for early learning, and maybe a small portion for the post-secondary piece is maybe around 5 to 6%. But what I can do is I can double check that to be exact for you to make sure I'm accurate. It's a rather and just to be honest, it's a very small portion of our budget that's going, like I said, around 5 or 6% for Seattle Promise.
Are you expecting a budget increase this year?
So what we have, right? So the way the promise was built in, we built it in through the levy, and it passed. The voters passed it in 2018. So we built in a budget to go throughout the life of the levy. So it's just staggered. It'll be a staggered approach all the way through the levy to support the promise program.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
So I think I'm going to ask one question, and then I'm going to let them ask each other some questions. So do you have programs that sometimes people have a bunch of experience, and I see one comment in here about different kinds of degrees that somebody has for teaching English and how a bachelor's is preferred. So do you have some way of certifying or giving people some type of credit for actual work experience so they don't have to take coursework because maybe they've already can demonstrate that they can do that? Are there any programs to help people do that, get credits for work they're already doing?
Mike, could you talk about prior learning in the state?
Yeah, there's a concept called credit for prior learning, which basically an institution can meet with you and review your life experience, your other studies, if you've ever been anywhere else, whether it's a credit program or not, and assemble that into a package and award credit, in fact, for some of that, and then guide you to a pathway to fill the gaps to complete an associate's or bachelor's degree. One of the things there's only so many issues any agency has a bandwidth to deal with. This is an issue of significant importance. But what we don't have a feel for, we've not been able to devote a lot of time and energy to, but we at a statewide level. But what we don't know is, because this is all carried out at each institution more or less separately. And it's possible SBCTC, and Dr. Lange can tell us this, is actually try to coordinate across all 34 state community technical colleges. But one of the challenges we have, I think, societally is to do a better job of this, and to figure out how to do it in a way that a student, it doesn't make any difference which door they show up at, they're going to get the same sort of results.
And thank you, Mike, for answering that, because one of the issues is that each college, and the Seattle colleges, we at least do it as a district, so all 3 colleges, North, South, and Central, are on the same page, but every college does their own assessment of prior learning. And so it's more common in our workforce programs or our professional technical programs than it is in our academic transfer programs. So if, for example, you are going to study airplane mechanics, which is a program at South, and you've been in the field and in the industry, you may be able to opt out of some of those courses. But a lot of the programs are also sort of bound by accreditation and industry rules around what kind of experience someone has to have in order to get that credential. So that's why it is so difficult for us to have sort of a uniform policy on terms of prior credit for prior learning.
Oh, so if you had, who was getting ready to say something, that
was me.
Okay. Director Chappelle.
Well, what I was going to say was that, and Dr. Lange, I don't want to hate to put you on the spot, but I know that, and I'm just speaking of another opportunity that Dr. Lange and is semi-related. What we're doing is, like, through the levy, we're also partnering with the Seattle colleges and Seattle public schools and created a Academy for Rising Educators that's happening within Seattle Public Schools, where we're taking those educators who are there and maybe serving as instructional assistants who aspire to become teachers and helping get them certified and taking courses up at up at Central College. And we're calling it Academy for Rising Educators to increase the number of teachers of color within the profession. So I just thought when I heard this, I thought I'd highlight that as well, Dr. Lange.
Yes, so and that has been a highly successful program. I think we had 27 students in that first cohort. We have another 28 in the second cohort and are on track to have another 25 in the third cohort. But what we do is it's individual assessments of those teaching assistants, and we're trying to attract more Seattle Promise students to it as well, so that students could get interested in becoming a teacher in high school. And then through the partnership with Seattle Public Schools and the city, it's almost like a teaching apprenticeship. So they are hired by Seattle Public Schools. They get to shadow a teacher in the schools, and then they're getting paid for that while they're learning. So it's like earning while you learn. And part of the intake process is to look at what other courses they might have taken. Many of them might have started college and didn't finish it, and making sure that we get them as much credit for whatever they have done prior to enrolling in the program, so that they can be on their fast track to earning their AA degree, and then transferring to Seattle Central Washington University, City University, or the University of Washington to earn that bachelor's degree, and then be on track to earn their teaching credential. It's a new model, and if folks don't know, over 80% of the teaching assistants in Seattle Public Schools are folks of color. And so it is a very racially diverse group for us to recruit from and get them skilled up and trained to become teachers.
Joanna, if I might, this is Diane
Yes.
Ramsey. Director Chappelle, in preparation for this meeting, I went to the Levy Oversight Committee website, and I did watch the most recent meeting. However, I could not find links for past meetings or presentations or agendas associated with the meetings that have been held. Is it possible for you to have your staff put that data up so it is accessible to the public?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, it is. It is. We can. I'll go back and check that, because we typically like to make sure things are posted for public, for folks to view. So thank you for giving me that information. And I can tell you that we are right now in the process of launching a new site. And so I'll make sure once we get that up and going, that we definitely have that information up for you to view. And thank you for going and checking us out and interested in the great work that we're doing. So I'm saying all of that just to say that our new links should be up shortly.
Thank you. And before you close out, Joanna, I just wanted to personally thank Dr. Edwards-Lange and Mr. Miyadi and their staff for being so helpful and just so wonderful about agreeing to be presenters for this. You were my charge, and I appreciate the communication. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And I will also thank Kyla, Lackie, Director Lackie, and see, I had another person. Oh, Director Chappelle and his staff for also their cooperation and getting back to us and presenting tonight. It's been like really a fun night. And I guess one comment I have is eventually I'd like to see a more finely grained data besides just students of color, like a little bit more finely grained data there.
Yeah.
I do have that, Joanna, and I'm happy to send that to you. That would be helpful.
Okay, and that would be great. Also, I'm wondering if our presenters tonight, if you can send us send the league some of your materials, because since you ended up sharing your screen, we have some of the materials, but we don't have it all. So, and we like to have copies available to review, because then our committee meets, and I was not taking careful notes tonight. I was listening. So that I would really appreciate getting those. And I want to also thank Adele Reynolds and Allison Fair for their technical assistance tonight. The timers, Pat Griffith and Diane Ramsey, and Meg Van Wyk for being the chat moderator. And I want to mention that Pat, Diane, and Meg are also members of the Education Committee who helped make this program possible. And the League of Women Voters is a volunteer-powered organization and is staffed by one person, Allison Fair. And without this organization, these forums would not be possible. And it was wonderful to see everyone tonight. And thank you for participating. And we have 3 more minutes if somebody has a burning statement. Otherwise, we can all go enjoy our dinners or our evenings. Thank you.